Hello and welcome to another edition of the Michigan Conservative Roundtable. We're like the five, but there's only three of us, and without Dana Perino. Tonight you're getting treated to another Marty Monologue where we have just the right amount of alliteration. And tonight I want to talk about how it's not about you. Shaving our faces or keeping our facial hair neatly trimmed, our haircuts. I had a friend 30 years ago that lost a job because he had blue hair and he insisted it was his right. And his employer insisted it was his right to fire him. Another friend that kept his hair long, even though his employer wanted the hair cut short, and his protest was, I comb it, I keep it clean. You know, not invalid protests in and of themselves, but they kind of ignore what I think is a very important question. And that question is, who do you represent when you're on a job? And I'll tell you who you represent. You represent your employer. And more on that in a minute. There's a news item recently where a funeral home local to Detroit is being sued in court over the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission standard, which for years said you could not be discriminated on grounds of sex, but the word sex has been changed and substituted with the term gender identity. This man identifies as a woman and is demanding the right to dress as a woman even at work, and his employer is balking at that. To my mind, this brings up a bunch of very interesting questions. What I said a minute ago, you represent your employer when you're on the job. You represent somebody else. That means you've taken on the responsibility to look and act and treat things as though you were the employer. Because you're representing the employer, you're really standing in their stead. So whatever reasonable demands your employer makes, you're subject to them when you take the job. And there simply is nothing in the world wrong with that. Your employer don't want you to have blue hair, you can't have blue hair. Your employer wants you to follow a certain dress code, you gotta follow that certain dress code. That's the real bottom line there. It strikes me that your job, whatever your job is your job. And I don't know anybody's job description where part of the job description is be yourself. No. Your job is to do the job exactly as it's entailed. And I don't see where you're particularly allowed to be yourself, at least in most jobs. There may be some exceptions, op-eds, cartooning, whatever, but you get the point. Most jobs, it ain't your job to be you. It's your job to represent a company and get the work done. I think that we need to learn in this country that you really should put your job ahead of you when you're on the job. In this particular case, you're dealing with grieving people. You're dealing with people that have come to a funeral home to mourn a lost relative, friend, or you're dealing with friends and relatives that are there to support the people who have more directly lost loved ones. You know, you're not there to show grievers that I think I'm a woman. That's not the reason you have that job. Okay? You shouldn't be adding things onto what these people have to deal with in a very trying time in their lives. I mean, the bottom line is, what they're going through is more important than your feelings. And this applies beyond the funeral sphere anyway. I mean, you know, when someone's going into the store to buy groceries, they're there to buy groceries because they need them, and your feelings aren't important. You might be there to, oh yes, the corn's on the other aisle, it's on sale, to give that sort of direction. But your feelings don't enter into it. You're there to do a job. What you think you are doesn't matter to that job. At times, I think the self must be suppressed anyway, and I don't care what you think of yourself. You may be a duly married, male-female, a married couple, and with every right to have relations, but you better not have them in the produce aisle at Kroger's. Okay? No matter how strong the urge is, you gotta suppress that sometimes. I think a question we don't often ask ourselves is a very simple one. Is it better to commit an injustice or tolerate one? Even if you're certain you've got the right to dress as a woman wherever you are, in this particular case, you're in a funeral home. If you're that certain that an injustice is being committed against you, maybe you should stand back for the sake of the circumstances that you're living in, that you're working in. That's a very important point that I don't think a lot of my liberal progressive friends are going to take into consideration. Having jobs anyway, do you have a right to a given job? You really don't. You may have the right to pursue employment, but pursuing employment does not mean that you have the right to any particular job. You got the right to seek work, not to have this job right here. As such, that means the people offering this job right here have the right to put certain requirements against you. They simply do. And, if you don't like it, don't take the job or leave the job. There's a point here where the right to ownership comes into play. I'll tell you point blank, if you cannot own things, you cannot really be free. Because if you can't own things, even abstract things like a company, then you can't be free because there's nothing under your control. And a lot of people would accuse this funeral home owner of hubris for not wanting this man to dress like a woman. Why isn't it hubris for this man who thinks he's a woman to tell that guy how to run his business? Why isn't that hubris? And I'll tell you something, in situations like this, at the end of the day, the pendulum belongs on the side of the business owner. It's his business, not the employee's business. Really, do you have the right to force folks to accept who you think you are at any time, under any circumstances? No, you don't. You do not have that right. If I don't want to think, Mr. Transgender individual, that you're a woman, I don't have to think that you're a woman, and you don't have the right to make me think you're a woman. It's really just that simple. What it all comes down to, bringing this Marty Monologue full circle, is life ain't about you, sweetheart. Get used to it. Life is about doing the right things the best you can according to the circumstances you're afforded. That's what life is about. It ain't about you and what you think you are, and at the end of the day, maybe the real question is, maybe we're not the ones who need to change. Maybe you're the one that needs to change. That's been your Marty Monologue for this time around. As we always say at the Michigan Conservative Roundtable, be safe, watch your six, and don't tread on me.